Welcome, everyone. Thank you to our panel participants and to our viewers present and future. On behalf of the Sedgwick County Conservation District, thank you all for joining us. Funding for this panel is provided by Humanities Kansas, a nonprofit cultural organization that connects communities with history, traditions, and ideas to strengthen civic life. I would also like to thank our media sponsor for this evening, KMUW. And now I'll introduce our panel moderator, Sarah Jane Crespo. She is the Director of Community Engagement at KMUW, and she has been an enthusiastic advocate for the Soil Stories Project, right from the very first time we talked about it. I think that was in November of 2019. So Sarah Jane, thank you for your support and encouragement, and thank you for facilitating this discussion tonight.
My pleasure. So I would like to welcome you as well to Soil Stories Common Ground Gardening Discussion, where we're celebrating Sedgwick County soil. I am Sarah Jane Crespo, and we have all had experiences with soil, whether we live in a rural or urban setting, whether we're young or old or in between, whether we farm or garden or play softball or soccer or make mud pies. The purpose of the Soil Stories Project is to bring people together from all over Sedgwick County to share their stories of soil. Tonight, we're going to discuss things that grow in that soil with some experts and some who are newer to the practice of gardening. Send us your gardening questions in the comments section. We would love to share those as well. Joining our panel is Rebecca McMahon from the K-State Research and Extension Office and Carrie Wharton with the Goddard Library, who are both helping people get started or to up their gardening game. And we have Carissa Bowers and Matt Johnson, who are both trying new things in the soil and have a lot to share with us. Welcome to everyone. Carissa, I would like to start with you just because you just began gardening this last spring or pretty recently. How did you get started?
Well, I grew up out in the country, so the dirt is very familiar to me. I was a mega tomboy as a kid, and
you did the mud pies thing.
Oh yeah, totally into mud pies. We have on my parents' property, they have a pond, so I was always down at the pond catching frogs and, you know, all the good things kids do when they're outside. And my parents had a massive garden, and so I grew up always pulling weeds and helping harvest once things were ready to be harvested. So it was very much a part of my childhood. But since growing up and just, getting busier with extracurricular activities, and then moving away and going through college and renting at various places, it fell away from me, and I was really eager to re-engage with gardening. Once my husband and I bought a home, just months before the pandemic actually is when we bought our house and moved in, and but I was really intimidated because even though I was around that stuff when I was a kid, like my parents are not explaining to me why you grow these plants together or what your soil needs to have. So I felt like I was starting fresh, even though it was such a big part of my growing up years. So yeah, moving into the house and just that eagerness to kind of return to the soil, I was just excited to get my hands in dirt. And to try to cultivate something in our backyard that would be fun. And another big part of moving into our house was I was really excited to compost, which Catherine Johnson turned me on to. And I think I was more excited about composting than gardening, actually. Maybe because it's more passive. I don't have to water my compost, I don't have to weed my compost. But yeah, so that was kind of long-winded, but that's what got me into gardening this past year.
At what point did you kind of feel like you had fallen into the rabbit hole so to speak, of this passion and just sort of, you know, giving yourself over to it?
Yeah, well, good question. I think that probably talking to Catherine, and I mean, she was sharing with me all the possibilities with compost and how much waste that keeps out of the landfill and the benefits that compost has for your garden, for your yard. I also have chickens, and so they benefit from my compost as well once it's out in the yard. So that kind of got my gears turning towards, okay, now I really want to invest in my backyard. And I was also given a bunch of seeds by one of my friends who works at Legacy Ministries, and they have a garden component to what they do. So it felt like everything aligned in terms of conversations and resources, both from having a house to being given all these seeds and endless time in lockdown.
Right. Very good. Carrie, I want to come to you next. You started a community garden project at the library last year. First, just tell us about it a little bit.
Well, last year, part of our strategic plan that we had worked with WSU on was to create a community garden. And so we wanted to attach it to our summer reading program. And last year's theme was Once Upon a Time, which was a fairy tale theme. And so we wanted to do a multi-generational garden. We have a couple retirement homes out in our community, plus involving our teen groups, involving just we wanted to just have a big community garden place for our community to be able to gather and to work on something. So that's kind of where we started with the project, was part of our strategic plan. And then we just also wanted to do something to bring the residents from our retirement homes with our teens and with some of our school age children as well.
And you ran into some challenges, of course. COVID happened.
Yes, yes, we did.
What happened?
Well, we started out, it was going very well. Lots of support from the community. I got donations from Home Depot and Orchard Farm Store everybody was really eager to help. We got permission to use a lot next to the library from one of our chiropractors here, and the city came and they helped, and I felt like we were kind of going well, and then we kind of hit some roadblocks. Obviously with COVID, we weren't able to meet in large groups, and then also people just really were not up for getting out. Those, just didn't want to get out during that time, and so we kind of hit some roadblocks there. Then we discovered where we wanted to plant, there was cement underneath that area, so it just but I felt like for each challenge that we faced, we had something positive that came in return. So it wasn't that, because at one point it's like, maybe this is not what we should be doing, but we just, we kind of scratched our original plan and came up with a new plan. And that's kind of what we're working on this year. And again, we apply for one grant, we don't get that grant, we get another grant. So it always seems to, it keeps coming around that obviously that this is what we're supposed to be doing. And it just, I think this year will look a little bit different, because we'll be able to have people out at the library and things like that. So I think the vision that we had will definitely come to life.
And when you talk about an intergenerational garden, can you explain a little bit how it works? Like, is it young people who come and garden, but the gardens are there to serve an older generation, or how does it work?
We wanted to be able to have like a community garden day where residents came over, and then we also had teens that gathered too, where we had just several different age groups working together, and that way just to kind of have the older population, mentoring the younger population, and vice versa. And so that was kind of our original plan. But like I said, with COVID, people were not wanting to get out at that time. So I did have some teens that would come. We had some scout troops that came out and participated. But a couple of those roadblocks that we hit, that kind of made us had to step back a little bit. So this year, we're going to do planter boxes where each group will be responsible for their specific box. But we'll have hopefully have some days where we all gather together and share and talk and give out resources and be able to say, you know, this is what's working with our box. This is what's not working. Be able to, again, still have that, you know, intergenerational time happening. So that's cool. So hopefully we'll get that going.
Yeah, and it sounds like you'll get to the place where, you know, Carissa with her parents, like, she's kind of demonstrated for her how to do things.
Yes, I would say that this is not, I mean, I've learned a ton. I've used the Sedgwick County Extension office. They've hooked us up with a master gardener, Deb Anderson. She's been fantastic, because this is definitely not my wheelhouse. I'm not a dig in their dirt personality, but it's been tons of fun because there's so many resources and so many people in this community that have such a passion for it, that they are willing to share that knowledge or guide me in the right direction or just help participate in that. So that's been really great to see, is that even though I might not have all the knowledge that I need, that I'm able to find resources to get that, and that there's people that are really excited about it and that really will help with that. So I think going this year, our plan, hopefully, you know, we have a better plan of what's going to happen, and we can see it come to life, because I think it'll be a really neat project and really great for all kinds of different generations and our teens, and we have, you know, Girl Scout troops, and there's just so many great things that could come from it. It's just that last year, I think it just wasn't the right time to do that. So I think what our plan this year, I think, is going to make it even better and really bring our vision to life.
Oh, that's great. And doing the thing that libraries do, where they're giving people resources and connecting them to resources. So that's really cool, just with, you know, soil.
Yes. So hopefully it will, you know, produce other things, other programs that we can do throughout the year. We've already had several different ideas of things that we can do, especially once we can start having more people in the building. And just maybe it'll produce other things within our community, or just within some of the other groups, whether at the retirement homes or teen groups or with the schools. So, I mean, I think a lot of things can birth from just the family garden. I think there's a lot of things that can produce from it, not just, you know, the flowers or vegetables or anything like that. I think there's lots of things that can happen. We just have to just get through that hump of actually getting it where it needs to be.
Yeah, I want to come back to that idea of all the different kinds of things that benefit people from the act of gardening, beyond just, you know, having some food at the end of the day. But first, I want to come to you, Matt, and ask you, because you got into building hugel beds last spring. Can you explain what they are and why you wanted to use them?
I will try. Yeah. I mean, I want to put a footnote by my name, like, because when you said, like, you mentioned being joined by experts, and my heart sank, because I was like, uh-oh, I'm on the wrong panel. Yeah. So, and then you said others who are new, and so that's definitely where I'm at.
You're an expert compared to me, for sure, on hugel beds. So just, you know, go ahead and teach us.
Okay. Well, so I learned about hugel beds from a friend of mine who is an expert in permaculture, and hugel is the German word for hill, and so hugel culture is this way of building these kind of hill beds that utilize logs or large chunks of wood at the core, and then layering smaller limbs and branches and other organic material on top of that. And then even sometimes you can put soil or compost on then the top layer. And hugel beds can be made quite large. I've heard of folks using scaffolding to build theirs. Mine are not that big. The ones that we built are about 3 feet tall and about 5 feet wide and about 10 feet long. So they're big. It does look like I buried a dinosaur in my backyard, basically. Luckily, my neighbors are cool with that. Um, and the idea is that the logs and the lumber inside just gradually break down and form this fantastic sponge, and so they absorb water. So there's a good kind of not like drought resistance quality, and then also just the releasing of the carbon and nitrogen, that's slowly released as those plants break down, and just keep nurturing that soil for many, many years. So I had heard about it, and we actually had gone out just before the pandemic to Victory Garden. I'm sorry, to Brian Mann's garden, and met with him, and he has built massive hugel beds, many, many feet long, to address standing water in his property. And he grows incredible vegetables out there. And he was so gracious to kind of show us around and let us see what he had done. And that was right before we went into lockdown. And then as we went into lockdown, a friend of ours told us they had a tree that had been cut down. There were extra logs available if we wanted them. And we thought, okay, why not? And then actually later in the summer, we had a catalpa tree that had partially died, and we had an arborist come and take down the dead limbs, which then made it possible to build another hugel bed. And
so it is this sort of lasagna of earth matter and plant matter that you build a kind of sheet pan style, a giant sheet pan lasagna of earth that then you plant things on. This is a very bad analogy, but I'm picturing this, and I think I'm getting it. But that's interesting. So you kind of had collected logs from here and there, and
yeah.
So what did you grow that you hadn't been able to try before, or did it enable you to try some different things?
It did. Hugel beds are a long-term gardening investment, and so we knew starting it that it would be kind of a gamble. We weren't sure that it would be possible. We were able to grow some kale, some chard, and we had a volunteer tomato plant that came up out of the compost that we had spread on there. And it was quite warm, so the temperature allowed seeds to germinate very quickly in the spring and to sprout. And what else did we plant in there? I think it was mostly greens types of things.
I like how you put that, a volunteer tomato plant. Just, I want to grow. Let's see if I can take some time. That's cool. Very interesting. Well, Rebecca, I'd like to come to you, and you, of course, are the reigning expert here tonight.
Something like that.
What do you think are some of the most important tips that people can take to get their soil ready?
Oh, wow. I just, there's so many interesting stories and lessons from everyone, as to what they did. And maybe I'll just, pull a few things from what everyone's talked about and relate it back. Just urban soils, right? For those of us in urban areas, or more, even if it's not urban, more developed areas, Carrie's experience of thinking you've got a spot to garden and then realizing, something
concrete under there,
and that doesn't work. And so I have to have another plan. And that is so common. I've been in many situations looking at a property with someone who wants to do a garden or start a community garden or do a project, and you start digging down in the soil and realize this soil has a history that I did not expect, and that is not necessarily conducive. I've had experiences where, we start digging and realize, oh, this part of this property used to be a packed limestone gravel driveway, and the pH is awful, and I can't grow anything there. So just that, experience of unearthing the history of your site and figuring out what's happened before, and both the sadness and the hope of realizing that there's still things we can do, but it maybe wasn't what I anticipated that it was going to be. So just understanding that our soil isn't just what we see on the surface. We have to dig down underneath and figure out what's going on, not just the top inch, not just the top 2 inches, but 6 inches down, 12 inches down, and really understand that as we get started with what we're doing. And then figuring out, like, maybe the soil hasn't been treated well. How can I work with it? And so, just the other experiences of, Carissa having, this background as a child, and I have a lot of those same experiences, but then I decided to go to school for it. And I loved my soils class, and, getting paid to make mud pies.
Are there,
so just that aspect of, like, revisiting something that's familiar but is all new. All of those things are so neat.
Are there some ways for people to kind of do like a soil survey? I mean, obviously digging past 2 inches down and just like looking would be helpful, but are there some other things that you recommend?
Oh, how long does this interview go? There are some great tools out there on all different kinds of levels. So the very first thing that I recommend to folks is just that, like, digging down, and scooping up some soil, feeling it between your hands, looking at the color, smelling it. If you're really adventuresome, you can taste it, and things like that. But working it with your hands, is it sticky? Is it gritty? Understanding, is it sandy? Is it clay? Is it silt? There's some fun, I like to do, it's a, not super scientific, but a fun activity is a jar test, where you put like a cup of soil in a glass jar and put water in and shake it up and then let it settle, so you can see the sand and the silt and the clay layers, and the organic matter floats on top. So some fun things like that. That's a little bit reminiscent of the mud pies. And then if you want to, like, know more, kind of science, history type things, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, has what's called a web soil survey. And soil scientists have actually mapped every different kind of soil across the whole United States. And it's so fascinating. You can put your address in, or your geographical coordinates, and it'll tell you what kind of soil. So soil scientists name their soils, right? So, it's silty clay loam, or, sandy silt loam, or silty clay, or all this crazy stuff. And then they even give it even more specific names. And so the soil survey names your soil. And so you can see what type of soil you have and its characteristics. And so many cool things. You can tell I'm really a soil nerd on that count.
It's the perfect place for you. Right?
Right. So that's a way to learn about your soil. And then, like, if you're going to garden, we often recommend a soil test. Our extension offices offer soil testing. There's private labs that offer soil testing. And you can test your soil pH, your nutrient levels, your organic matter levels, and kind of get a sense of, like, what can I do? What are some things that I can do to improve my soil?
So poor quality soil kind of affect the goodness of the vegetables that you eventually grow? Does it affect how nutritious the vegetables are?
Absolutely. The health, the quality of your soil, like the work that Matthew is doing with the hugelkultur beds, like that long-term investment, of breaking down all of that awesome organic matter into nutrients. Anything that we do that adds to the health of our soil, that adds organic matter, that adds make sure our pH is in a good range, that we have great nutrients. All of those things are going to, at the very minimal level, impact whether our plants even grow. That is sometimes the saddest thing. Like when I have people bring sad plants and it's like, what can I do? And it's like, well, they don't have the nutrients they need. Like that's step one. So whether your plants live or die is all based on the health of your soil. And then beyond that, like absolutely, the healthier your soil, the more microbes it supports, the more organic matter, nutrients, the healthier your produce is going to be, the more nutritious your produce is going to be.
So if you figure out that you have a soil that has a lot of clay in it, for example, I've heard it said, like the east side of Wichita, it's more clay. What is the fix for it?
The fix for a clay soil is organic matter.
So you would just give your yard more organic, or your garden beds.
It's time and organic matter, in a nutshell. There's a little more to it, for sure. But, we love to hate on our clay soil, but I love to tell folks your clay soil is not the end of the world. It holds water. It's so rich in nutrients. And when we're facing down hot, dry weather, that you want that water holding capacity. You don't want that sandy river bottom soil when it's 100 degrees and the wind is blowing. You want the nutrients and the water in that clay. And so, the clay is not the end of the world. It's just every year adding some organic matter. It's treating it with care. We don't want to till or work our clay soil when it's wet, because that damages it. We just want to be really careful with it and respect that clay, because it's a trick to work with, but it's not the end of the world from a garden standpoint.
Wow, that's lovely to hear. It's, I hear the clay soil kind of getting bashed a little bit. So.
Well, it's got a reputation for a reason.
Yeah. Well, all right. It's just a little more complicated than we thought. Carissa, I want to come back to you and talk about your experience a little bit more, and what motivated you and what you feel like you learned the most from this last year of your gardening adventures.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and first of all, Rebecca, I could listen to you talk about soil all day. You love soil so much, and it's so evident. I feel like when I was listening to you talk about how you can observe so much from soil, like the further you dig down and just all the information you can glean about its history and like its story, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, are we talking about people? Are we talking about like walking in relationship with people or soil? So, soil therapist. What I learned from gardening, is that the question?
Like this last year, your experiences, what you feel like you took away from it. And I also wanted to ask what you grew. I didn't get a chance to ask that earlier.
So what I learned, it was really humbling. I think I had really grand expectations for my garden, especially when comparing it to the gardening, that I grew up with my parents. And this was my first time planting a garden. So I learned to have fun and to have grace with myself and my soil. And I learned that I don't know. Like, I don't know what I don't know. So that's another reason why I'm so thankful that people like Rebecca exist, because obviously you know so much. And And Carrie, you know, the work that you do in connecting people who don't know what they don't know to people who do know what they do know. Yeah, and yeah, I loved it.
Did you have any successes as far as a particular vegetable?
I did. So my beets did pretty well. My chickens probably enjoyed them more than I did because they always, that was an ongoing battle, to be honest, because we let our chickens out in our yard while we're at work during the day, or when we're, you know, not in the yard. And they tended to get to some of our gardening goods before we did. But it's okay, you know, have at it. You've got to eat too, it's fine. So our beets did pretty well. Our kale was delicious, and so is our Swiss chard. I was really disappointed in our tomatoes and our peppers. And I was confused because other people, their peppers and tomatoes just took off. So I don't know what I did wrong there, but I had some volunteer tomato plants pop up by my chicken coop, and I don't know how, but they were cherry tomatoes and they did great. But the tomatoes I planted produced nothing. So I don't know what that tells you about me.
Well, Rebecca, I don't know. I want to bring Rebecca in on that. Do you, as she's talking, are you like, ah? And if so, what are you thinking? What does this mean?
Give me your wisdom.
So that's really fascinating because with our master gardeners run a garden hotline, and one of the things I train them on every spring is how to answer the "my tomatoes didn't do well, what happened?" question. And so in response, there's actually about a dozen questions that I would have to ask to diagnose the exact situation. But you know, hey, our garden hotline is a great place to get help with that diagnosis. You know, because there's so many things, you know, it could be variety related. For new gardeners, sometimes heirloom varieties can be tricky compared to other varieties. I love recommending the cherry tomato varieties to brand new gardeners because they're a lot more reliable, you know, and a lot more likely to get something that you're going to be happy with. Whereas those big beefsteak varieties look really amazing, but they are, I've grown beefsteak varieties, and there's years I'm like, okay, awesome, you had 2 tomatoes this whole season. Like, so it's not always the gardener's fault. Like sometimes it's the variety. And then like Kansas can be really tricky, like the planting window and the nutrients in the soil, like all of these things interact and can result in, like, if you don't hit the right bloom window before it gets too hot, then you have to wait until fall. And if, you know, there's so many cascading things that can happen. And so that would be a message to anyone who's even not a brand new gardener, is if your tomatoes did not perform well, it does not mean that you're a bad gardener. It just means that there's any number of things that might have gone wrong. And even those of us that know what's going on, there's years when we're like, yeah, no, nothing happened.
I appreciate that.
Carrie, what about you? I wanted to ask you about your successes that you saw in the program, and I know obviously it went all sideways a little bit, but were there some stories that came out of it, or some experiences that you got to witness that you thought, you know, that really affirmed for you how impactful and meaningful the project will be going forward?
Yes, I mean, we didn't get anything to grow, but community-wide.
Except for relationships, right?
Relationships. I would say more for us, it was relationships. Just from working with the community, the Orson Farm and store here in Goddard, I guess, never gives out donations to anybody. And so I called and they just said, sure, come on over and get what you want. So I just said, oh, and I didn't know that they didn't give out donations. I just called and asked. And so I went over with a cart and they loaded me up with all kinds of stuff. So that was kind of shocking when I came back and they're like, you got that from where? And because apparently they just don't donate very often. So that was great to see. Home Depot, they were willing to connect me with some things. And then because we weren't able to produce anything or get really started the way I want. They said, just call us back this year and so they're working with us again this year. So I felt like a lot of community relationships were established out of it. Obviously, I've worked, with the Sedgwick County Extension office. Our master gardener, I mean, I have never met her personally, but visiting with her on the phone and emails, I mean, she was just fantastic. And so that was a great, I felt like partnership that I've developed there. Working with some of the scout troops here in town have been fun. And so I just really feel like we've established more personal relationships with people. And so I think this year people are going to be excited about partnering and wanting to be a part of it, just because it's going to kick off and be in kind of a different direction. So even though we didn't successfully plant anything or grow anything, I do feel like it was a success in a different way. And, because for me personally, I mean, we look at programs, we look at numbers and we look at, was it a success? Was it not a success? I definitely think that it was successful, but just not in what we had thought it was going to be successful in. I mean, obviously I'd like to see, beautiful flowers and everything and, all over the place. And that's what we kind of envisioned, and all these people working together. But I think it was good with the partnerships that we established and the relationships that I developed with people within the community, groups that I had not worked with before, and just establishing just a great partnership with them. So
yeah, that's beautiful. And unearthing the more of the story of Sedgwick County soil, as it turns out.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I mean, I've just great resources. So, I mean, I would highly, again, some of that, like you said, a library is part of our mission, is to get knowledge and to enrich our community and to engage our community. And so if somebody was to ask me questions about something, I definitely have resources and places I say, this is where I would start, or this is who I would contact. And so, and that's some of our, that's just some of our outreach and some of our, that what we do here at the library. I mean, obviously we'd like to see the garden and all those great things that we'll harvest from there. But some of our, our outreach for us is to engage our community, and that's, partnering, showing them resources and places that they can contact. That's definitely a great thing. So, yeah.
Good. Matt, with all of your gardening, have you seen, do you think, a financial benefit? Have there been fewer trips to the grocery store?
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, that question does cross my mind sometimes. I think that when I was younger and earlier experimentations in gardening, I did anticipate, saving some money. And I suppose so. It's hard to measure.
It would depend too on what you're growing, I guess. Are you growing kale, expensive kale, and
yeah. And potatoes and the occasional surprise tomato plant that pops up. Those things. I think it contributes to a healthier diet, just in terms of if it's growing. We have an asparagus patch that I really love. I don't know that we would buy asparagus, but it's there and it's really prolific and it contributes to our diet. And so I think, there's some savings there, certainly. I also think what I kind of feel when I think about it is I think that I'm taking a longer view too of gardening, that while I may not be able to measure the savings, there's the hope of nurturing. I'm really echoing back, like, just what Rebecca shared about, like, caring for the soil and just like caring for creation, and like, in what way, just to have something growing in my yard, even if it never ultimately produces any vegetables, the act of caring for it and seeing it come alive, and the way that it is part of something more diverse than just a yard of grass, which was what we had when we first moved into this house. And it's like, no, now there's things blooming, and there's bees and butterflies flying around, and it is putting roots down into the soil and nurturing the soil further down. So thinking more about those, I'm personally thinking more about those kind of long-term benefits, and that, I think that helps motivate me to, even when it's not being a very productive garden. For me personally, I think it may be productive for the earth. So.
Yeah, I mean, it brings back to mind that idea of what are all the different reasons why the act of working in the soil and gardening is good. And, you mentioned the bees having opportunities, for pollinators is a whole other thing beyond just your nutritional reasons or the nutritional benefits. And what I'm thinking of as potentially a financial benefit, but maybe that's the long game, as you said. And on that note, Rebecca, are there some other like big benefits to actually, do you know of is there some good microorganism that benefits us when we touch soil? I mean, is this something that soil nerds are studying?
Yes, it's like you read my mind. There's tons of fascinating things out there, about how touching the soil and some of the microorganisms is good for your immune system. It's good for your mental health. Like all of those pieces come into play. I also wanted to respond a little bit to what Matt was saying about maybe if the garden didn't seem successful from a harvest standpoint, maybe it's still doing something good. And I was like, yeah, it is. Because one of the things that researchers and soil scientists are appreciating more all the time is that living roots in the soil are so important to the soil food web. Like there's millions of organisms in a tablespoon of soil, and having live plants growing in that soil provides food for those microorganisms. And that they're so necessary to life. And so even if you're like, I tell myself this when I look at my garden. This year it's not nearly as impressive as last year, Sarah. And I'm like, oh, look at those weeds. I'm like, that's okay. Those weeds are feeding the soil microorganisms so that when I get around to it, my plants will be happier. So yeah, all of those things are still great.
I remember reading something a very long while ago about the benefits of walking barefoot on the earth, especially for mothers with newborns. And I don't remember where it came from either. So, maybe never mind, but just that there is this kind of cascading benefit that might go upwards as well. But I was curious, Rebecca, if you can share kind of what you saw people experiencing over the last year, as so many people took up like pandemic gardening and victory gardens, wisdom that you feel like you've seen people experiencing, or just the lessons that maybe we can take from this whole last year.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's been the most exciting and rewarding is just to see the people who either have gone back to gardening or added new aspects to their gardening or started gardening from scratch. A lot of people had, this idea that it was something that they always wanted to do and just never had time for it. And so their world slowed down, right? And that was something that they were able to have time for or make time for. And so to see those outcomes, we have a Facebook group from our Victory Garden 101 class last year. And people would post pictures of what they'd harvested and the quarts of green beans that they canned, and their struggles, things that didn't go so well also. Then just not just what they had for themselves, but the impacts, that their family was consuming that produce, or they were sharing it with their extended family or their neighbors or friends, or donating it to those that didn't have produce, and just that continued ripple effect of all of those gardens, because you plant 10 feet of radishes and realize I can't eat 10 feet of radishes. Someone else is going to get to eat some radishes. So you see all of those, and isn't that something that we all needed so much in the last year, still need, is those opportunities to build connections and relationships. And like, how exciting is it, even if you're like, I got to get rid of this zucchini, like someone else is like, that is so amazing that you grew that. So to me, that even though I'm all about the gardening all the time, I think that is one of the best side effects of pandemic gardening, as it were, is those opportunities to have something in common with someone else and build those relationships.
I want to ask each of you now kind of what your gardening or your project aspirations are for the next year. And Carissa, do you want to start with what you're planning, what you want to work on next?
Sure. Well, to be honest, I have scaled back my expectations, I think a little bit based off of, I was a bit maybe too gung-ho last year. So I am going to focus more on just planting things I know I can keep up with. And I've been really interested in learning about the benefits of hydration this year. I know that that's kind of
you or your plants?
For me.
Okay.
And I know that's kind of like common knowledge, like, yeah, of course you need to drink water, but I read a whole book on hydration, and obviously like cucumbers are hydrating, but a whole part of this book was about how valuable it is for our bodies to be hydrated through gel form of water. So a lot of times we consume that gel form of water from plants. And I love cucumbers, and I didn't try growing cucumbers last year. So I really want to try growing cucumbers this year, because if they were just in my backyard, I would eat like 3 cucumbers a day. So I want to focus more this year on gardening for what I want to have readily on hand. And I'm saying I want to because things got busy for me. Like the pandemic, I was very thankful for all of the margin. I feel like there's been quite a bit of distance for me to where it feels appropriate to name some of the blessings that have come out of that time for me personally. And that space, that margin was one of them. And but yeah, so I had more time, I feel like, to think about my garden and like draw it out where I wanted things. And I just haven't done that this year. But this conversation is really energizing me and encouraging me to focus towards that. So I want to plant things that I will just eat regularly. And like, I don't eat peppers that much. I don't want to grow peppers. I know I'm not going to grow carrots well. I don't want to even try. Like, I just
grow what will taste good. Grow what you want to eat.
Grow what I want to eat. Yeah. And so that's my plan for my very loose tentative plan for this next season.
That's great. Okay, Carrie, how about you?
Well, my dream and vision is to see us have several planter boxes purchased and have several different groups participating in adopting those planter boxes and planting some beautiful things, and having a time that we can come together as all those different groups and have a community garden day and share things and just hang out together and connect. And that would be our vision and goal. So, and then we can build on it the next year. Maybe our entire front yard will be full of all these beautiful things. So that is my vision, is just to see, at this point, if we have 2 boxes with people participating, I will be very excited about. So, but I would like to see just several boxes and several groups from all over the community participating and growing and learning, and definitely learned lots of things today, and have encouraging words that, it's not always what comes out of that you're going to make the, our outside area pretty, and that we're conserving, where we live and things. So I definitely think that it will be exciting to see from here what it looks like. So that's my dream and goal. So
thank you. How about you? How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I think we're also scaling back just a little bit. I'm okay with that. Like, realizing this is a different year and a different space. But I think so. There's 3 little experiments that I'm focusing on. One is just continuing to look for ways to make sure that something is growing in the ground. Rebecca mentioned that, and so just getting seeds planted, that even if I end up sowing other plants in the midst of those, later in the season, as opposed to just kind of a bare garden approach that I've done in the past. And so looking for ways to just get anything growing anywhere. The second experiment is just that a friend of ours gave us 6 grapevines last year, and part of this, and they survived. I don't know how. And so they're coming back. And so I'm learning how to prune vines, and that's a really fascinating process as well, and caring for the soil around those vines. They're Glenora grapes. And then the last thing I wanted to name that's an experiment for me is just slowing down and paying attention. So just being more intentional about when I am in the yard, noticing what's blooming, what's alive, what's changing, how is the soil. These are things that I'm not knowledgeable about, and I think bringing a little more curiosity and awe to the backyard and to the front yard, and for me it's a good way to grow, healthier as a person. So I'm doing that as well.
Very good. Rebecca, how about you?
Well, I can definitely feel Carissa on the margin of the last year, and that all of a sudden it got busy. So it has been so busy, with people interested in gardens and farms and all of the things. I may speak a little bit to a couple programmatic things instead of specific garden things. But
you've got your garden figured out, so yes, that's more than appropriate.
It's figured out, not a whole lot done yet, but I wanted to, for folks interested in doing more, maybe making a business. We've got our Growing Growers ICT program that is going gangbusters this year. We've got lots of workshops and farm tours and exciting stuff on the docket. And the other thing for folks that are still kind of creeping into pandemic gardening or post-pandemic gardening, is our Master Gardeners are sponsoring a community bloom and grow event on May 1st, where we're giving out free vegetable garden kits and pollinator kits. So kits of plants and seeds that are either vegetable focused or pollinator focused. So if you're still looking for a motivation to creep into that, or just need some inspiration, those are some opportunities coming up.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for joining this conversation today. It was such a fun conversation. And I hope you've enjoyed our program. You can watch it again and share it with family and friends by visiting sedgwickcountysoilstories.org. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. Thanks for watching, and back to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you so much. On behalf of Sedgwick County Conservation District, thank you, Sarah Jane, and thank you, Carissa and Carrie and Matt and Rebecca. I just appreciate you sharing those soil stories with us. And I love that the conversation this evening really reinforced that idea of stories. Like, soil is so much more than a growing medium. It's really that repository of all kinds of stories and themes. Like, you talked about family and community and creation care and the long view of ecology. And so I think that's beautiful. Carissa, you started us off talking about compost, and that is a great lead-in for tomorrow's Soil Stories feature. So I hope everyone will visit our website tomorrow when we release a video with everything you need to know about backyard composting. And so that was prepared for us by Valerie White and the Sedgwick County Master Gardeners. And so we look forward to that. And yeah, just have a wonderful evening, everyone.